This morning's session was around commissioning, with a particular focus on the rural context. And this afternoon's is looking at residencies and creative communities. And I think it's interesting to think that, obviously, as with commissioning, residencies can happen in both a metropolitan and an urban, as well as a rural environment. So it's about the city too. And I think a couple of the speakers will be referring to residencies that aren't necessarily in a rural context. But I think what we're interested in doing is looking at the residency as another kind of model of artistic practice and production. And then hopefully through the discussion, the panel discussion afterwards, some of this can be brought together and applied to some of the thinking around the conference and the rural situation. Again, very briefly, as has been mentioned, the conference has come out of early discussions around thinking about what it would mean to host Manifesta in a region like Cornwall, in a rural, dispersed region. And I think very early on, we began to think that in order to even begin to think about that operating down here, we had to think of quite radically different models for the kind of biennale type exhibition. And certainly the notion of residency was something that emerged quite early on. And something again that was talked about this morning to do with notions of speed and pace in terms of both art production and in terms of the way that it's consumed by audiences and accessed by audiences, is I think very interesting. And obviously the residency can be of any kind of given length and offers a very different kind of notion of speed and pace. And I think that might be something that we'll pick up on this afternoon. The last point I wanted to make was around the St Ives colony. I'm from Tate St Ives, and we're thinking very much in terms of how we begin to develop our residency and research models in St Ives. And if you think about Cornwall, and particularly Penwith, as historically a colony which has attracted artists for over 100, 150 years, and you think about what the colony meant for the movement of artists and ideas, both intellectual kind of ideas, but also physically moving artists in and around places and spaces, then there's a kind of parallel you could draw with the residency. And certainly we're interested in thinking what the legacy of a colony means in the 21st century, and whether...
So, where I work looks like this in summer. Some of you might recognize that character. It's Jonathan Watkins, just so you know, on a residency. It looks like this in winter. And this is Lake Minnewanka, which is about 10 minutes from the Banff Centre. I don't think you can have a Canadian without a husky, so I've included a couple of images of huskies that are up there in the wintertime. You can take husky sled rides, so some more. This is what it looks like in summer. This is Moraine Lake. It's another image of Moraine Lake.
So, as Martin said, I did grow up in St Ives for a large part of my childhood, and today I'd like to talk about Los Angeles in contrast. And rather ironically, it was coming back to St Ives yesterday that I got for the first time in my life sunstroke, so got a bit of a raspy voice and have slightly clearer intonation normally. So in 2008, while I was still studying in Frankfurt at the Stadtschule, I was invited to do residency in Los Angeles at the Mack Center, which is based in a historic house called the Schindler House, and this was designed by an Austrian architect, and they run a residency program for artists and architects, and I'd formerly studied architecture. And was chosen to come for 6 months to live in a Schindler-designed apartment and to prepare a project at the end to be shown in the Schindler House.
Thank you, Teresa, for inviting me here and in this incredible place. But I would like to place you in other city, in Warsaw, which is a kind of traumatic city, because at the moment it's under transformation after this big trauma of the Second World War and also communist time. So it's so visible in the city, and the history of the city, it's something which we experience every day. You have like this is the view of the window from the gallery, and in the center of the city there is this emblematic building gift by Stalin from the 50s. It's still the highest building in Warsaw. And it's in some ways stigmatized the city and also destroy kind of urban plan of the city.
Grisdale is in the middle of the Lake District, in the middle of the forest, and it moved from being a sculpture park, in fact, So that farm is now a base that we use to generate projects. It doesn't have a gallery space. We closed the gallery space some years ago, actually, but Lawson Park wasn't conceived with a gallery space anyway. The ambition of the programme is that it works very closely with its immediate community, which is the valley and the village of Constant. And that, in effect, reflects the Lake District, which is, we don't know, an extremely complex cultural place with a fascinating history. Our nearest neighbour is, historical neighbour is John Ruskin, who actually used to own the farm at one point. So, kind of hard to avoid some of the things that he was doing in the area, and what is rather ignored in terms of Ruskin's legacy being sort of loosely regarded to as his mad years, when he worked at social programmes really in the community, but quite fascinating. We're always unearthing new ones. I think the key point about the residency is that artists work with us over very long periods of time, often 10 years, well, roughly 10 years, it's only been running 10 years. Quite a few artists have worked intimately with us over 10 years. And we build up, and we have built up, a large sort of resource really, locally. So a lot of people we work with consistently locally, lots of organisations, community groups, etc. But skills as well, and then married to quite an eclectic range of artists. So we look to find artists that represent different positions within the art world in many ways. And one of our ambitions with artists is that they will do something useful. So we're quite concerned, it's quite directed, and we do see a purpose for art. We do see that purpose being manifested locally. I suppose in a way that the other programme that runs alongside that and intermeshes with it is much more of an outward-facing programme, much more international, and in many instances gives the artists the opportunity to express their artworks, most of which we're not particularly interested in producing. So we're really more interested in the process of creating these works and how they work, how they manifest, and how they engage, and in the way that the artists go off and can show those works elsewhere. But the projects we do internationally tend to be quite targeted, and we've worked, for example, in a small village in Japan as part of Triennale there. There's often a lot of exchange, always an ambition for what you do, and importantly, I think for us, there has to be a legacy, and that's how we put projects and measure what impact did that project have. Does it